General Hospital spoilers for the next 3 weeks, August 11th to August 29th, hint that there will be potential Maxie Jones abduction risk while Harrison Chase and Willow Tate get closer. Michael Corinthos will also become a manipulation target. So here's what GH viewers can expect. Carly Spencer's encounter with Marco Rios will take place between August 11th and 15th, while Jason Morgan will meet up with Alexis Davis once again. Jason may inform Alexis that he needs to leave town for a while, and request that she keep an eye out for Danny Morgan in the meantime. Jason will next proceed to the Five Poppies Resort, where Britt Westbourne will experience more strain due to her lab work. Jocelyn, Jax and Vaughn will also be there on their WSB recon trip, albeit Jocelyn may disobey orders and put them in danger sooner or later. Meanwhile, GH teasers say Vaughn and Jocelyn's attraction may result in some genuine sparks as they continue out their married charade. When Jason returns to the resort, he will be determined to find Britt and will manipulate a few Five Poppies staff in the process. Chase will be forced to make an unpopular arrest once he returns to Port Charles. If the lab break-in plan fails, Giovanni Giopalmieri is likely to end up in jail. Drew Kane will almost certainly make another pitch for their future when he meets Willow. Willow may decline Drew's advances and later tell Elizabeth Baldwin about the incident. Back with Chase, he'll continue to bond with Willow and deliver some bad news. Willow will repay Chase's kindness, probably when he is dealing with the aftermath of Joe's incarceration. While Chase bonds with Willow, Drew will make a cunning move against Michael. No matter what Drew does, Michael will not like it. Curtis Ashford will also receive a shock, which could be related to the insurance fraud inquiry that Drew requested. Stella Henry tinkered with the system several times over the week of August 18th to 22nd to assist Martin Gray, but her good deed could backfire if Drew has anything to say about it. Next, Kai Taylor will most likely plan a spectacular gesture in the hopes of reconciling with Trina Robinson. Back with Jason, the countdown will begin when he faces Britt. Jason and Britt will eventually have a question-and-answer session when they encounter each other again. Jocelyn's mission with Vaughn will take a hazardous turn after Jason arrives in Dalmatia. It'll be fascinating to see whether Jason discovers Jocelyn's WSB gig and makes a mess of it. The week of August 25th to 29th could reveal further information about the mystery boss, while there have already been some signs that Caesar Faison may be alive and in command. If the scenario becomes too dangerous, Jason may have to turn this into an escape plan, with Britt by his side. Jocelyn may also require a rescue, particularly if Vaughn is injured or worse. Back with Drew, he may go bigger and bolder in his efforts to win Willow back. Drew will also want his enemies to fear him, which could cause complications for Michael. However, being on Jen Sidwell's bad side could prove to be a huge mistake. Sidwell might become Drew's worst nightmare if he is pushed too hard. Sidwell also has some leverage because he can make Sonny appear to have bribed the court in order to influence the custody decision. It's only a matter of time before Sidwell uses that information to dominate Sonny. Sidwell may put Maxie in a difficult situation in the coming weeks. There have been hints that Maxie may have been kidnapped, so Sidwell may take extraordinary measures to ensure she stays silent about the Sonny Corinthos proof and deception remains intact. Whatever the case may be, General Hospital spoilers indicate that Maxie will be temporarily removed off the canvas, so stay tuned for updates on her fate. According to General Hospital spoilers, Willow Tate is losing it following a botched marriage attempt and being separated from her children. Will her new aim be Drew Kane, the man she blames for her problems? Everyone in PC has been attempting to pull Drew down, so it would be wonderful ironic justice if Willow is the one to ultimately send the congressman to his knees. Will Willow break Drew? Drew is aware that Willow was the stalker that targeted baby Daisy Gilmore. She did it to punish her ex Michael Corinthos, the baby's father, and Sasha Gilmore Corbin, the mother. Mom and child fled Port Charles for safety, so Drew now has a lovely little bit of blackmail to hold over Willow. Would he sink so low as to use this to compel her to reunite? We don't put anything past Drew, including blackmailing a reluctant woman into being with him. Willow could be backed into a corner, but Drew should be concerned about Willow's readiness to play dirty. Who's to say she won't attack him back? She has nothing to lose, which makes Willow extremely dangerous. Is she able to knock him unconscious and hide him somewhere? Definitely, maybe. And there are plenty of others who would theoretically be prepared to assist Willow, such as Curtis Ashford. Everyone hates Drew. Curtis believes Drew's blackmail against his family has been neutralized for the time being, but he is aware that the threat could resurface at any time. Nina Reeves might also help if she could get Willow to forgive her for sleeping with Drew. Tell us, GH fans, what you believe Willow is capable of. Every day she resolves to be a better person, but she struggles to follow through. If she is provoked, do you believe she is capable of turning on Drew and potentially injuring him? Or would she relish capturing and torturing Drew on a daily basis? The night Maxie vanished was unlike anything Port Charles had witnessed in months. It wasn't simply that someone had gone missing. It was like a thread had been torn from the town's delicate fabric, and everyone could feel it unraveling. The first several hours were chaotic, with Felicia pacing outside the police station, her phone clenched so tightly that her knuckles became white, and Mac working overtime to keep the inquiry under control. However, as the story spread, it had an impact on lives that appeared to be far distant from Maxie's. Those vibrations would affect Chase, Willow, and Michael in ways they could not have foreseen. Chase was at the station when the call came in. He hadn't been assigned to the case yet, but he was in the middle of paperwork when an officer announced that Maxie had failed to pick up her daughter from daycare. Her automobile was discovered abandoned near the ancient waterfront warehouses, a location infamous for nefarious transactions but rather calm in recent months. Something about the details bothered him, not only the location but the sheer lack of witnesses. It was as if Maxie had vanished into the night. Chase wasn't close to her personally, but he'd seen how much she loved her children. She wasn't the type to leave them behind without saying anything. Willow learned the news from Brooke Lynn, who had hurried into the hospital with a frantic expression in her eyes. Willow was in the break room between patient rounds, sipping lukewarm coffee, when Brooke Lynn blurted it out. Willow's mind initially went blank. She'd seen Maxie just a few days ago, laughing over a silly work situation at Deception, juggling texts and calls like only Maxie could. The concept that she was suddenly absent and possibly in danger did not make sense. Nonetheless, in the hours that followed, Willow found herself drawn further into the scenario than she had anticipated. Chase was assigned with canvassing the area along the waterfront, so he called Willow that evening to check if she had seen or heard anything unusual in the previous few days. She hadn't, but his voice sounded tired and heavy, so she offered to bring him food. He resisted at first, but she could tell he was exhausted. Later that night, after Michael had departed for a meeting, Willow arrived at the precinct with a paper bag full of takeout and 2 bottles of water. Chase looked up from his desk when she stepped in, and his countenance changed, just a flicker of relief, but enough for her to notice. They ate in a corner of the station, away from the din of ringing phones and officers sharing information. Willow inquired about the situation, but Chase was unable to provide much details. Instead, they ended up discussing the toll this type of work had on him, the sense of chasing shadows, and the frustration of knowing that each passing hour made it more difficult to discover someone alive. Willow's gaze softened when she understood how much he cared. Not just about the profession, but about the individuals trapped in these nightmares. She had always admired him, but in that moment, she saw a fragility she hadn't noticed before. Meanwhile, Michael was facing his own storm. He was in the middle of delicate ELQ discussions when he received a cryptic text from an unknown number that read, "Maxie's absence alters everything. You know what you need to do." At first he thought it was a terrible hoax, but when he tried to trace the number, he got nowhere. Hours later, Michael received a second message. "Play your part, or the truth will be revealed." He wasn't easily spooked, but the timing was strange. Someone knew something, possibly about him or his family, and was using Maxie's abduction as leverage. He didn't want to believe the 2 incidents were related, but the thought gnawed at him. He attempted to be cool around Willow, but she sensed his distraction. When she questioned whether anything was wrong, he dismissed her concerns as work-related stress. Willow found herself confiding in Chase about her own concerns as she spent more time helping him. She mentioned that Michael had been tense and guarded lately, and Chase unintentionally expressed his own worries. He'd known Michael long enough to know that when he became quiet, it typically meant he was in more trouble than he was admitting. Chase didn't push though, instead he focused on providing Willow with a safe environment to talk, which she had not realized she needed. By the 3rd day of the investigation, Chase had uncovered a few problematic leads. A witness claimed to have seen a woman matching Maxie's description near the warehouses being led into a black SUV by a tall man wearing a dark cloak. No one had acquired the license plate, but surveillance footage showed the vehicle driving toward the outskirts of town. Chase relayed the update with Willow over coffee, and she was overwhelmed by a sense of terror and urgency. She couldn't ignore the suspicion that this was more than just a random crime, that Maxie had been targeted for a reason. Michael, on the other hand, was meeting secretly with the sender of the mystery texts. The man seemed calm, almost smug, and didn't spend time getting to the point. "We both understand Maxie's disappearance isn't my fault," he remarked, reclining back in his chair. "But it generates opportunity." Michael clenched his jaw, understanding he was being boxed in. "If you don't want certain business deals made public, you'll ensure a vote in my favor at ELQ." Whoever it was, they had enough dirt to make things difficult for him and, by inference, Willow. Willow called Michael that night to see if he wanted to join her for dinner at home, but he declined because he was busy. She didn't tell him she was going to supper with Chase instead. But the reality was, she needed the comfort. They talked for hours, their discourse ranging from the case to their personal lives, and Chase eventually admitted that seeing her smile made his days a little lighter. Willow reddened, caught off surprise, but she did not back away. In the days that followed, the search for Maxie became more intense. Felicia was on edge and refused to rest until her daughter was located. Mac collaborated with other departments and pulled every thread he could. Chase kept Willow informed as much as he could, but he knew some issues should be kept private. Meanwhile, Michael felt the pressure increasing. Every decision he took suddenly felt like a move in someone else's game, and he despised the sense of being controlled. Willow began to notice small changes in Michael, such as a shorter temper, distracted discussions, and late-night phone calls that he refused to explain. She urged herself not to jump to conclusions, but a part of her couldn't ignore the contrast in how she felt around him and Chase. She could breathe when she was with Chase. Michael lately seemed to be holding her breath, waiting for the other shoe to drop. The relationship between Chase and Willow grew stronger as the investigation progressed. He'd call her late at night to talk about the inquiry, or about nothing at all. Even on the most difficult days, the sound of his voice made her smile. She didn't want to admit it, least of all to herself, but a part of her wondered if their connection was more than just friendship. Michael also observed the shift. Willow's warmth for him had faded, softly but undeniably. He told himself it was because of the stress she was under from worrying about Maxie, but deep down, he felt it was because of him, the falsehoods he'd been forced to utter and the secrets he couldn't reveal. The thought that Chase could be the one she was looking for increased the weight on his chest. Chase stopped into the hospital to see Willow one evening, as the sun began to set and the search teams prepared for another long night. He'd just returned from the waterfront with new information that could finally solve the case. He was on his way to a secluded cabin miles outside of town with a team in the morning after receiving a tip about it. Willow reached for his hand without thinking and warned him to be careful. The contact lasted longer than either of them expected, and in that brief pause, everything between them seemed to hum. Michael, standing just around the corner after arriving to surprise Willow, witnessed everything. The way she stared at Chase. Chase didn't draw away. His stomach twisted, not out of envy, but because he realized that while he was busy attempting to play a hazardous game to protect himself, someone else had quietly stepped into the space he was leaving behind. The next morning, Chase and his team set out for the cabin. What they discovered would change everything, not just for Maxie, but for everyone caught up in the web that this kidnapping had created. As the dust settled, Willow would have to confront the truth about where her heart truly belonged, while Michael would be left wondering if the manipulation he'd witnessed was merely the beginning of a much larger threat. Willow's flat was in disarray, reflecting her whirling psyche. Half-empty coffee mugs cluttered the counter, papers were scattered on the table, and the television droned in the background unnoticed. She paced, her bare feet scuffing against the wooden floor and her hands twisting as her mind raced. Drew's finding was a ticking time bomb. He hadn't approached her yet, but she could sense it coming, the weight of his knowing look every time they crossed paths. He was now a congressman, a man of authority and ambition who was not afraid to use leverage to achieve his goals. Willow had seen it before. His vicious streak, his ability to manipulate a situation to his advantage. He had blackmailed others and twisted his way through Port Charles's complex web of secrets. And now he had her secret, one that could damage her chances of seeing her children again. The notion had struck her in the depths of night, when sleep refused to come and the silence was too deafening. If Drew was trying to use her secret against her, she needed to neutralize him first. It wasn't just about protecting herself. It was about surviving and getting back to her children. She couldn't allow him keep this over her, drive her into a corner, or worse, back into his embrace. The idea of being duped into a reunion with him made her stomach turn. Drew was not the man she had previously loved. That image of him had been destroyed by his affair with Nina Reeves and his insatiable desire for power. No, she would not let him win. She'd confront him. Even by her recently established standards, the proposal was risky. She never believed herself capable of kidnapping Drew, but desperation has a way of rewriting the rules. She'd overheard enough at the hospital to know he'd be in an isolated cabin on the outskirts of town, which he used for private meetings. It was ideal, isolated and silent, with no one to hear him if things went wrong. The notion sent a chill down her spine, not from fear, but from something darker, something resembling power. She'd need assistance, however. She couldn't lift an unconscious man alone, and she couldn't rely on anyone. Curtis Ashford sprung to mind almost immediately. Drew had previously burned him, trapping his family in the crossfire of his plots. If she could persuade Curtis that Drew intended to use her secret to harm them all, he might be willing to cross a line with her. The next day, Willow discovered Curtis at the Metro Court, nursing a drink at the bar. His face was marked with fatigue, the kind that comes from keeping too many secrets for too long. She slid onto the stool beside him, her voice quiet and steady despite the turmoil within her. "Curtis, I need your help," she whispered, her gaze locked on his. He lifted an eyebrow, apprehensive yet attentive. She did not waste time. She lay it all out. Drew's awareness of her involvement in Daisy's stalking, his history of extortion, and the threat he posed to them both. Curtis' jaw tightened as she spoke, and his fingers gripped the glass a little harder. He didn't trust Drew, that was obvious, but kidnapping? That was a huge step forward. "You're talking about playing dirty, Willow?" he remarked, his voice low. "Dirtier than he's ever played." She nodded firmly. "I am done being his pawn. Are you in?" Curtis did not respond right away. He peered into his glass, the ice gently clinking as it melted. Willow held her breath, knowing that this was the moment that would make or shatter her plans. Finally, he looked up, his gaze hardened. "If he is coming for my family, I am in. But this remains between us." Relief overwhelmed her, but it was fleeting. There was no going back now. They spent the next hour planning out the details, how to entice Drew to the cabin, how to overpower him, and where to hold him. Curtis offered an old warehouse on the docks, which he knew from his time working with Sonny Corinthos. It was abandoned, out of the way, and safe enough to house someone like Drew without drawing notice. The night of the plan was cold, with a shiver that penetrated your bones. Willow's hands shook as she drove toward the cabin, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. Curtis was already lurking in the shadows. Drew arrived on time, his car crunching dirt as it approached the cabin. He strode out, tall and confident, ignorant of the trap that awaited him. Willow's heart raced as she watched from the branches, her breath short. Curtis moved first, quietly and quickly, a shadow creeping behind Drew. Drew collapsed to the ground silently after receiving a sharp hit to the back of the skull. Willow's stomach lurched, but she forced it down. It was necessary. This was for her kids. Getting Drew to the warehouse was more difficult than she had anticipated. He was heavier than he appeared, and despite Curtis' strength, it took both of them to get him into the back of the vehicle. The trip was silent, with the weight of their actions hanging over them like a fog. At the warehouse, they bound his hands and ankles and fastened him to a chair in the center of the vacant space. The air smelled of rust and salt, and the only sound was the distant lapping of waves against the docks. Drew stirred, his head lolling as he awoke. His eyelids flickered open, perplexity giving way to reality as he saw Willow standing in front of him, her face masked with purpose. "Willow!" His voice was raspy and filled with incredulity. "What the hell is this?" She didn't flinch, didn't let his disbelief get to her. "You know why you're here, Drew," she replied, her tone firm. You believed you could use Daisy against me, hold it over my head and manipulate me. That will not happen. Drew's gaze narrowed, his mind already working and calculating. You're making a mistake, he whispered, his voice low and menacing. Do you believe this will fix anything? You're digging your own grave. She moved closer, her face inches from his. Maybe. But I'm not the one confined to a chair. Curtis stood by the entrance, arms folded, watching the conversation. Willow sensed his concern, but he did not intercede. It was her show now. She had expected to feel powerful and in control, but instead her chest felt hollow. This was not who she wanted to be, but it was what she needed to be. Drew's knowledge was a threat she couldn't ignore, and she was willing to go to any length to protect her chances of reuniting with her children. You're going to stay here until I figure out what to do with you, he was told. If you try to scream or flee, it will only make matters worse. Drew's lips curved into a sneer, even as a drop of blood streamed down his temple. Do you think you can keep me here forever? Willow, people will notice that I am gone. They'll come looking. She didn't answer, but his words bothered her. He was correct. Port Charles was not the type of location where a congressman could disappear without raising suspicions. She hadn't considered the future or planned for what may happen next. All she knew was that she could not let him destroy her. The following several days were a flurry of worry and second-guessing. Willow slept little, her thoughts racing with worst-case scenarios. Curtis checked in whenever he could, but he had his own life and secrets to keep. Nina Reeves was an additional problem. Willow hadn't planned on implicating her, but Nina had noticed something was wrong. She walked up unannounced at Willow's flat, her eyes filled with concern. What is going on, Willow? She demanded. You're acting like you're hiding something big. Willow paused, her desire to drive Nina away clashing with the knowledge that she might need her. Nina was determined to make amends and repair the bridge between them. If Willow could trust Nina, she might be able to keep things under control. She told Nina everything, not because she wanted to, but because she had no option. Nina's face turned pale as the story unfolded, but she did not flinch. I'll help you, she answered gently. Whatever it takes. Willow was torn between relief and terror. Nina's involvement complicated things, but it also provided a safety net. If things went wrong, Nina's resources and connections could be life-saving. They kept Drew fed and quiet, but the strain was beginning to show. Willow's willpower weakened with each passing hour, the weight of her axe bearing down on her. Drew was far from vanquished. He observed her with sharp, calculating eyes, waiting for her to slip. He did not beg or plead, and he did not need to. His quiet was a weapon, a reminder that he was still deadly, albeit tied and helpless. Willow felt the clock ticking and the walls closing in. She had set out to take control, but now she was the one caught in her own web. The question was not whether she could keep Drew hidden indefinitely. She couldn't. The question was what she'd do if the truth was out and the consequences of her actions came tumbling down. Port Charles was a town based on secrets, but those secrets eventually surfaced. Willow knew it better than anyone else. As she stood in the warehouse, seeing Drew's steady gaze, she felt the weight of her decisions. She had crossed a line that she couldn't go back on. But she would keep going for her children and the chance to hold them again. Even if this meant losing herself in the process.